what do you want to become when you grow up? My answer has always been a teacher. It never changed. Never ever. I was growing in the era of power cuts, scheduled power cuts. And then when the concept of lithium-ion batteries actually percolated into stationary storage, I'm like, oh, there is a solution right there, I can contribute. We know what energy poverty is. That word has been coined many decades later after we suffered for so many years. The scientists in Fraunhofer, which was this big battery institute in Germany, they made these cells for us using the same technology, the same temperatures and everything. So that was like a eureka moment. Oh, this can be a product.
Hi, and welcome back to Care Beyond Profits. I'm Azura Ali. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Shalini Divya. She's the CEO and co-founder of Tasmanion. It's a company that's building the next generation of aluminium-ion batteries. They don't catch fire, and it costs a fraction of what's out there today. Shalini grew up in India where they had scheduled power outages every single night. This drives everything that she's working on today. We talk about her personal story and we also go into her full entrepreneurial journey. I'm sure you're going to take a lot away from this conversation. If this speaks to you, please like, subscribe, and comment below. I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate you. Now let's get into it. Shalini Divya, thank you so much for joining me today.
The pleasure's all mine, Azura. Thank you for inviting me.
As we start today, I want to start off a little bit about you first. So for our audience, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did it all start for you?
So I was coming to New Zealand to get a PhD. Since my bachelor's and master's in chemistry, I knew that I would be going ahead in the world of science. So when I came here for my PhD and started working on batteries, little did I know that a company would be spinning out a couple of years later. But yeah, I think I have always loved the idea of, making sure that the technology gets converted into a product that can change lives. Being an entrepreneur was not in my cards ever. I thought I would become a lecturer or a professor in the next 10 years, but here I am. I think just making sure that everything, when you're working with your technical team or with your directors or with your shareholders, just making sure that everyone is aligned with your vision, with your, dreams and everything that surrounds the company is what I have always been after.
Oh, that's awesome, Shalini. And so you talked about doing a PhD when you first came here. So for our listeners, before that, in terms of where you started growing up, can you share a little bit more about that? Let's go all the way back and what did that look like? What was your environment?
Absolutely. So I have been a grade A student, for a very, very long time. So what ended up happening was that I knew that I wanted to do chemistry instead of engineering. I come from India, and in India, most of the dads or your parents, they are after, oh, you either become a doctor or you become an engineer. My sister, thankfully, she is a software engineer, so that burden was off me. But even then, I remember my sister had to fight on my behalf so that I could pursue chemistry honors for my bachelor's degree. So I knew, like back in high school, that chemistry was a subject that I was after. And I got good marks and everything. And I got into one of the best universities in India that offers a great chemistry course. And that was it. I did my chemistry honors. And then my dad was like, you know what, find a good job. I mean, it's just a bachelor's, you can go to a bank and work and everything. Nothing against bankers. My dad is a banker, but I knew I did not want to do that at all. So I pursued master's after that. And master's is where I started learning about energy poverty and devices, for example. Like my thesis was on lithium-ion batteries. And it was so funny because while growing up, I was growing in the era of power cuts, scheduled power cuts, which means I knew that there would be no power, no electricity from 6 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. And that is when you sit and study. So it was very normal for me to be like, oh, of course we need batteries, like batteries are the things that drive us. And then when the concept of lithium ion batteries actually percolated into stationary storage, for example, where I saw solar lamps coming in, or villages, trying to use lead acid batteries to pump up the generators or whatever for long periods of time. And I'm like, oh, there is a solution right there. I can contribute to the problem I have seen while growing up. So that became my vision while I was working towards Tasmania. I realized that developing nations like India or Africa, the other Southeast countries, we know what energy poverty is. That word has been coined many decades later after, we suffered for it for so many years. So yeah, I think I've always been passionate, be it about chemistry, about, like creating solutions to an existing problem, or stuff like that. So I think that passion became the main ingredient when the company was being spun out. So that's a bit about me. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. So, in terms of your company, how did you start? Where are you at in your journey at the moment?
So we started when you think of setting up a battery company, as a founder, you need to understand where your market is going to be. Like batteries are used everywhere. They can be plugged in a lot of appliances that you use every day: your cell phones, laptops, auto rickshaws, and so many other appliances. But the thing is, the requirement for those batteries was very different. So, day zero, my job is to understand that this technology that I've created in my lab, and if it's going to get converted into a product, which is that first market area or country or region that needs it the most, that is desperate for a technology that does not catch fire and is much, much cheaper. So, all of that started happening when I started stalking people on LinkedIn. I stalked these battery manufacturers and their CTOs and these big companies, trying to understand that if I am bringing a new tech into the market, what is the sort of validation that they would need? What are the technical hurdles that they want us to get rid of before they can work into it and make it a commercial, massive product? So all of that took almost 1.5 years before Tasmanian was actually spun out, right? So the my due diligence on potential investors, understanding what a term sheet is, understanding how a VC functions differently from angel investors. And so it was such a steep learning curve, Azura. So it took a while. And thankfully, I had participated in an accelerator. And that accelerator allowed me, which was from Creative HQ, by the way. Big shout out. Like, they have been my biggest cheerleaders when I started. So they allowed me to practice my pitch in front of investors. Now, this other thing I found out about myself is I love pitching. I am crazy about pitching, be it Tasman ion or back then aluminum ion battery idea. So it was mostly about telling the investors that this is the vision that I have. This is what the product might look like in the next 3 to 4 years. And this is the amount of money that I need. I had no idea about the entire financial breakdown and stuff. It took me some time, but that was it. I learned that the investors are also looking for that passion, for that clarity in the vision. Finances, you can get people to help you out. But here, the whole idea of how that first team is going to look like to make this technical milestones and all of these hurdles much easier, mitigate the risks and everything. So yeah, it was, there were a lot of challenges, but I'll not lie to you, I had so much support. Physically, like, I was surrounded by advisors and mentors. Emotionally, I still have my very, very close friends who have no idea about entrepreneurship, but they know when, life is throwing curveballs, how you deal with it. So yeah, it's been crazy. It's still crazy, but I knew always that if I am in trouble, I've never shied away from asking for help.
As a child, how did you come into this? Did you always know that you wanted to go down this path? You talked a little bit about expectations from your parents. Take us all the way back to that growing up and share a little bit more about how did that part look like in those early days?
Oh my God, it is so funny. So I clearly remember that when I was 4 years old or 5 years old, I would wrap around my mom's stole and scarves, wear it like a sari, and then have a pen in my hand and start acting as a teacher. So I had bunch of invisible students sitting on my bed, and I would be writing on the walls. I mean, not writing, but like pretend that pretend game, and I would be teaching them, right? And I never remember when people used to ask me, "Oh, what do you want to become when you grow up?" My answer has always been a teacher. It never changed, never ever. Like when I even was in my high school, there was a time when that doctor and engineering conversation happened, but in my head I was like, no, I'm going to be a rebel. That first rebel in my family, I'm going to become a teacher. I'm going to show it to my parents. But then I realized you can become a lecturer while pursuing the subjects that you want. And I remember having this very funny conversation with my sister. We were in the kitchen, we were helping out our mom, and my sister was like, so what do you want to do, when you're done with your studies, your bachelor's and master's? And I was telling her that, oh, I know that I can become a lecturer, but oh my God, do I want to become a high school principal? Do I want to go back to the school era and teach the kids? Little did I know, my dad was right outside the kitchen door listening to all of this. And he comes in and he's like, that is good, but you need to do something more. You're doing your bachelor's, you love science, you love chemistry. Try something in that area. But to date, Azura, like I know I'm the founder and the CEO, but when I look at myself when I'm like 50 or 60 years of age, I am a high school principal, where I can allow or just make sure that the students are in the best learning environment. They can do what they want. They can learn in whichever way they want. They get the independence that they are after. I got that, right? I had the freedom in my school, with my teachers, with my parents. So all of that is almost like drilled into me. So that was me back when I was a kid. But all of that changed, when Tasmanian happened. Like I was like, this is what needs to get out of, the lab, out into the world, and I'll change the world.
And what was the turning point when you realized that this is exactly what it was, the product?
I think it was about some of the validations that we did. So, for example, as a PhD student, I might have made more than 100, 200 batteries, right? But you are making these batteries in your lab until you make something outside, like until that has been validated. You're getting the same performance metrics and everything. You're not sure whether you are in the ballpark area for that productization journey or not. So once we did, and this was in Germany, like I was in my second year, I had gone to Germany and we made some aluminum ion cells using the same recipe as lithium ion, which is, the biggest battery industry today. So the scientists in Fraunhofer, which was this big battery institute in Germany, they made these cells for us using the same technology, the same temperatures and everything. So that was like a eureka moment. Oh, like this can be a product. And this was back in 2018. Tasmanian was not anywhere, in the horizon. So after that, we realized that, yep, this can be a company, this can be a proper, tangible product that can change lives. So I think because it's a deep tech company, validations have to happen for us from day zero. So once that happened, I realized that, yep, there is a possibility of converting this into a game-changing product.
That's awesome. So from Germany then, where did you go from there? Talk us through the trips that you've done and, how are you where you are today?
So Germany happened back in 2018, but when the company was being formed, investors also want some sort of validation, right? Like you provide them with your business plan, you provide them with a technical development plan, but if your investor does not have enough experience in the battery industry, how do they know what you're planning is actually the right thing? So they sent our technical plans to Fraunhofer and we got all of the green signals, like we got the go ahead. And so that was another turning point for me where I was like, yep, we're on the right path for the next couple of years. So this was when we got our pre-seed investment round, pre-seed, which was, I think, 750 New Zealand. We got our lead investors. We had angel groups. I got my technical team in place and everything. So it was pretty much solving the technical risks, like making sure that before you even step onto the commercialization process, you need your proof of concept to be done. You need your basic scientific risks to be mitigated. You do not want your science to be questioned. So we did all of that. That took us, I think, 8 to 12 months. And then we went to Australian labs, Australian battery labs. So there was something that we did with UNSW. There was a project that we did with Deakin Battery Hub. Again, pretty much similar to what we did in Germany, but something more towards the commercialization side. So, for example, making cells exactly like lithium ion, like the same shape and size and everything. We did face challenges, but at the same time, those challenges were not as severe as we expected them to be. So that is another win, for the tech team. So we did those validations. Then I started looking into the industries in Australia and India. Why? Because Tasman Iron is looking into the stationary storage sector. Now, the stationary storage sector is where your batteries are sitting on the ground. They're not moving around as your cell phones or your laptops, right? So your batteries can be heavy, but if they are cheaper, if they do not catch fire, the industry is going to love you. So that's what I did. After stalking people relentlessly on LinkedIn, I started reaching out to them. COVID, thankfully, had subsided down a bit and face-to-face meetings were happening again. So I reached out to all of these people in India and Australia, including the investors, trying to understand what the market is desperate for. Like, what is your core competition? Is it only lithium ion? Are there lead acid batteries? Is there a potential collab, that can happen between a lithium battery manufacturer and Tasman? So much work cut out for me, but that was my job, right? Simultaneously, we were lucky enough to get non-dilutive funding that helped us where we are today. So we are currently going for our next round. We have struggled a bit in the past year. So what we did was we did all of our milestones. We made sure that the investors were happy with whatever progress had been made. And that's when we realized, now time to conserve some cash. And now let's look for bigger investors or expand our business into Australia or India for that matter. So today, after completing validations in Australia, after getting this one customer in India who will be manufacturing batteries for us as we grow up, I'm hunting for investors again, because aluminum ion batteries, very sustainable. So for us, when I am pitching, a big part of my pitch is around sustainability of the raw materials. We are using aluminum. Our patented cathode is around boron, right? So both of these materials are extremely popular. They are commodity materials. And thankfully, the recyclability of both of these elements is extremely popular, well set up globally. So when I am talking about Tasman iron, or when people ask me that, oh, but what happens when a Tasman iron battery dies? How lithium ion is now populating the landfills and so on and so forth. It's easier for me to answer because I have spoken to so many industrialists in the world, and the biggest feedback is you want your customers to benefit as well. There has to be that mutual benefit, be it your customer, be it your end user, or be it your commercial partner. So your raw material suppliers need to benefit when they are having these business relationships with Tasman Iron. So yeah, that is where we are. We are getting into commercial relationships as well as technical and R&D relationships in Australia. And now we're going to need a much bigger team. So we are hunting for the skill set. Currently, we're struggling in New Zealand for that skill set. But hopefully, once we get the moolah in the bank, we get the best team ever.
That's awesome. And in terms of your marketing and your next steps, what does that look like for you at the moment with where you are so far?
So because you mentioned marketing, I am extremely resilient. It's a big part of my personality. And it turns out that it has to be a big part of you when you're in this journey, in this entrepreneurial world. So I came across a pitching competition, and it was a World Cup. And the only reason I applied for was because I thought I would get I would get to meet other founders, other technical founders, other battery business people, and see what are the ways of strategizing your move. Like, what if I'm missing out on something, right? That is all that I had in my head. So I applied for it. There were more than 10,000 applicants, and Tasman Iron got into the top 100. And unbelievable as it was, I ended up winning the World Cup in my category, which was the pre-revenue category. So that,
Well done.
thank you. That became, firstly, that was unbelievable. But there was also some prize money associated with it. We got like 50,000 US dollars. So that became such a significant validation for our technology, because this was me pitching in front of the world. There were 3 judges to begin with, which increased to 5. And in the finale, we had like the biggest pitching stage I'd ever seen. I had 7 judges in front of me. So as nerve-wracking it was, all my focus was on ensuring that they get the messaging of aluminum ion batteries and Tasman ion batteries right there. So obviously lithium ion battery became a popular question. Sodium ion batteries came up like after the competition. But the biggest push for me was that the world is looking for a cheaper technology. The investors are looking to invest into technologies that has a long-term plan, that does not depend on the spot pricing of the raw materials, that does not depend on the geopolitics. No one knows where the world is going to go. Like today, we know how absurd things have gotten. So when you are trying to change the world in your scientific methods, like using science, you do not want geopolitics to hamper that, right? So thankfully, all of our raw materials is safe. So that, I think, is the biggest pitch for me now. Like sourcing raw materials, making sure that the supply chain is not hampered and is cheap and blah, blah, blah. That becomes my biggest marketing gimmick. And then it's mostly about finding that right first use of your product. So stationary storage, again, it's a big industry. You can have UPS, you can have telecom industry, you can have residential homes. Which is the first product that you're after? So that is where we are right now. We've got our pricings and everything. So we know which country we want to target, but you also want to make sure that your manufacturing is cheaper, and like your business needs to be in the right places with the right relationships. So
for someone listening who's thinking about all your testing that you've done and the direction that you're now taking, can you talk us through how long did each of those phases take and where you're at now, so that there's a little bit of a picture behind all that effort that you put into testing versus your entrepreneurship journey? How did that look like for yourself?
I submitted my PhD thesis in February 2020. So it's almost 6 years now, right? In those 6 years, oh my God, the things I have learned. But to give you and the audience a brief timeline, the company was like, I became the CEO on the 3rd of January in 2022. So it took me 2 years to understand the ABC of commercialization, find the right investors, and make sure that we get the equipment and the team here sorted. Mind you, this was right after COVID. So getting your equipment from China was a big hurdle, right? Today, you can get your equipment in 3 weeks at max. Back then, it took us 4 months. So all of that happened. But I think my biggest struggle was around people more than the tech. Like tech, I was confident, like you know when science doesn't work for you, you know how to make it work because you know it from like your experiments and stuff. Understanding or managing people and their expectations, I think, is the biggest lesson for everyone, like anyone who works in a similar industry. So making sure that I understand where, for example, my shareholder is coming from compared to what my director is suggesting, and comparing that with my personal goals, as in the founder goals, not personal, but yeah, the founder's goals. So many frictions, you have board meetings where you're like, I get what you're saying, but in my head, I think this is the way we are supposed to go. So even those are learning curves. You learn how to present your ideas. You learn how sometimes you need to put your, how you get defensive sometimes. No, I know this is not how it's going to work. Experience is very important. So all of those lessons, thankfully, were very not tough lessons, not hard lessons. So it was good. I think I had the best directors to like support, like my founder director today, Jim Johnston. He was my PhD supervisor, so he has always had my back, and a founder needs that. So yeah, a validation conversations, accelerator conversations. It took me a year. So from 2022, we started working on our lab in Wellington. In 23, I participated in the Australian accelerator called Energy Lab. It was a climate response accelerator. And then, like, that accelerator opened up the Australian market for me. I reached out to Australian investors. That is when I reached out to these universities and battery hubs. And we signed these agreements. I started attending Australian energy conferences. So by 2024, all my validations had been sorted. We knew the challenges we had overcome. We knew the challenges we needed to overcome, and we needed money. So we got prepared for our next round by early 2025. So yeah, I think it's a very, very interesting is not a strong enough word, to describe the journey. It is a roller coaster, of course. Some days are going to be great. Some days you're going to find yourself crying. Some days you're going to be so happy with your team, so proud of your team. Some days I never blame my, colleagues ever, because as a founder, I've learned it might be me who's not giving the directions or is not discussing it good enough or well enough. So I took some, guidance and everything. I participated in these cohorts. So I think because making sure that your team remains motivated, your team remains inspired, it was important for me to understand how to communicate with them in the best way possible, because this was my first attempt at becoming a leader. When you're a PhD student, you have your freedom, you are independent. But when you're working with a team as their leader, your communication changes. The way you say certain things might be construed differently. So, you have to make sure your tone is right all the time. I am a nice person, but at the same time, I am a technical person as well, So I remember my scientist, and she's a great, great friend of mine. My scientist and I, we used to dive into these conversations like, oh, like, let's do this, let's do that. And then she would be like, I know, Shalini, but I think this needs to be done first. I'm like, yeah, Saida, but blah, blah, blah. And we just went on for like an hour or then more. And it never turned into a conflict. Never, ever. Like, all of these discussions were extremely constructive and productive from both ends. I have certain leadership programs that I was a part of to thank, because they also made me realize that, when you become a leader, you are with your people. Like, you lead only when people want to be led by you. So I think making sure that the friendship, because all of us were almost in the same age bracket, it was important to have a good relationship, making sure that they understand where my passion is coming from, making sure that they do not feel the burden of, the pressures of timelines and stuff. Like that is my job, to bridge that gap between the pressures I get from the market or my stakeholders to what the technical team is supposed to deliver, right? There needs to be a very transparent transfer of knowledge. So I can say today that I feel good about how we handled it as a team. We never ever had a day where there was a conflict that I needed to resolve as the CEO. So I'm really proud of that. So I think a company or a team can flourish only, when you have the best team around you and you have the best people to work with. And I got that. So lucky, lucky me.
That sounds like you had all of the right networks around you when you got started, which is quite a blessing on its own. In terms of someone who's navigating this who doesn't have the right people around and they were forming it from scratch, is there anything in your journey now you think back and say, actually, this is something that really helped me, or anything that you would share in that space?
If you find yourself in a conflict about a certain person that you have hired or whatever, it's best to act on it as soon as possible. Reach out to your mentors and advisors instead of being an empath. Like, I am a big time empath and I know how it has worked against me on certain occasions. Because you have a product to deliver, you need your team to be aligned with those goals. You do not need additional, like I have come across certain people in interviews that I was conducting when I was hiring people, where these potential candidates would be like, you know what, Shalini, I love your tech, but I think if you thought about it in this way, it's going to be much better. And if I join the team, I'm going to make sure that we do it the right way. Whoever is going to hire you, because firstly, if there is something we can do better, there is a way of coming across with that message. Like, I'm also the founder of the company. Like, this is my baby. So instead of, criticizing my baby like that, just be a bit more constructive about it. Anyway, I think mostly, your instinct, your gut tells you whether, that energy is aligned or not. But if you see it's just you who's having that conflict and the other team members are doing well, we need to work on ourselves. But if it's just you and your first employee maybe, and there is some sort of conflict, or you see that it's not going well, speak with your seniors, speak with other experienced people, share your issues, and it's better to act on it, because sometimes we feel that, oh, I should not tell him or her that because I might hurt their feelings. Well, you are stealing away their chance of improvising themselves or developing a certain skill set that they lack today. Like, it's not their fault entirely that they might not be delivering what we need. So it's very, very important to have that clear communication with people around you. Like, tell them that if this is not what you're getting, what is it that you're after? I give a very small example. So there was this, I think, one group meeting that I had with my team, and there was this presentation that we got. I knew the presenter, she had presented most of her work very, very, like always accurate. The data was analyzed and everything. One certain time, there was that I could only see numbers, and I had to jog back into my memory and be like, okay, so this is what she presented like 2 months ago. Okay, so this is where, so, like, it takes away a lot of time in the group meeting, and it takes away the other people's time of what they want to talk about, what their issues have been in the lab. So after the group meeting, we had a really constructive conversation about like, hey, I understand that, I remember the data, but at the same time, there's so many other things happening in the lab, like you are working on simultaneous projects. So let's have a bit of a context, all of these presentations, we'd be logging them into the data. And it's a good storytelling practice as well, for your team members or for the new interns that join or whatever. That's all I needed to do. Instead of being annoyed or being frustrated for the next couple of days and be like, oh my God, why did she give me a presentation that made me think about for the next 45 minutes? it was literally like a 5 to 10 minute conversation. And then obviously, it worked for everyone. So I think communication is key, be it professional relationships or personal. Just say what needs to be said, because yeah, you cannot blame others when you have not even told them what you're expecting. That's really unfair.
Totally. I want to touch on a few more things here, because one of the things that really stood out was you talked about empathy. I want to touch on your personal values and pivot a bit more to you as a person now and how you hold it all together. So, starting with if you could only choose 3 values that you will not compromise, what are they and why do you choose that for yourself?
I think, given the background or the experience that I come from, integrity is number one. You cannot, just for the sake of pleasing people, lie about what needs to be said or what you're talking about, right? Like, for example, I cannot imagine someone, let's say, manipulating the story or the data just to please me. I've never done that. Never ever. Like, during my PhD, during my pre-Tasmanine days when I was working on the batteries, so many batteries don't work. So what? It's science. I am not here to please people. That's not how you change the world. You need to identify, and this is a very professional example, unfortunately, but even personally, you cannot lie yourself into pleasing people or investors or anyone for that matter. So honesty and integrity, I think, are my biggest values that I cannot live without. I think the third is patience. I am the most patient person in my family. After my mother, of course. Like, she's literally a goddess when it comes to patience. I don't know where she gets it from. So patience has been key. And I just thought that patience is a quality and is a virtue, and that's fine. Little did I know, patience, kindness, all of that is jumbled up together, because if you're impatient, it's very easy for you to become unkind. And that doesn't work at all for me personally. I'm extremely optimistic. Again, I will use the word unfortunately here, because sometimes it doesn't do well in the industry that I have, but personally works wonders being an optimist. Anyway, so because I'm an optimist, I'm always looking for the silver lining, right? So if there are challenges that I've come across in my life, in my lab, in my company, I'm always looking for things that can be remedied, that can be something to look forward to, even if it's a tiny win. If I'm having a rough day, a rough week, a rough month, you are just looking for that silver lining as an optimist. And that itself makes you a lot more patient towards people who, are not very supportive. So, for example, you will have people questioning your, oh, but why are you sitting idle? Like, you should be working on this, you should be working on that. I'm not sitting idle. We have a lot of projects going on, but it's mostly about delivering the data that is needed, by the industry, and not just for the sake of creating data. You don't just present something to people. So that patience becomes very, very important. And some days I've seen my friends, my colleagues losing it, because, we are bound by timelines. We founders, we CEOs are bound by timelines. But oh well. So yeah, I think these 3 values for me are very, very important. So yeah, patience, integrity, and honesty.
Thank you, Shalini. And looking back at yourself, was there some people in your life from an early age that shaped those values for you, looking back?
My sister and I, we are very similar, except for the fact we have almost opposite personalities. She's an extrovert. I'm an introvert. Like, my job made me an extrovert later, much, much later, like literally in my 30s. So when I was growing up, my sister would never want to sit and study. She's the most intelligent in the family, but she would never ever sit and study. She would be getting like told off by my parents or whatever. And because I was scared of getting told off by my parents, I would just sit and study and be like, look, you know what? I need my peace. I love studying. I love, doing my homework and everything. So I'm just going to sit and study. So looking at my sister now, my God, it's so funny. I just realized that patience became a part of me when I was very young because my sister did the impatient, like portion of the family. I'm not sure of, that saying, like if you're patient, you get the results that you need. It's all hard work. I don't think patience actually delivers what you need, but yeah, hard work does. So yeah, when I was growing up, hard work was again something that was instilled in me. Because I used to be in these debate competitions and stuff, and I would love preparing. Like, I would reread my books and just make sure that I am the best version of myself. Thankfully, I am only competitive when it's needed. I have worked very hard since I was a kid, so it just made me more resilient, towards whatever has transpired since. Oh my God, it's so funny when you ask me to actually reflect back on such values and experiences because you are what you are today because of those experiences, and you never sit and introspect on how did I turn out to be the way I am today. But yeah, patience, I think, was something that I kind of reflected on again when I was speaking with my first investors, like trying to understand how this industry works. Because if I would get impatient about, oh my God, I'm not understanding this term sheet, or oh my God, I'm not understanding this license agreement, this is not the journey for me, I'm going to be a CTO, I'm going to be a CSO, and, like be done with it, I would not get what I want because I knew what I wanted for my company and I knew the reason why I wanted to be the CEO of Tasman Eye. So patience played a very important role then. Resilience is always going to be most of me. Like the molecules in me, they shout resilience. Because in a startup, you always have the burden of making sure your company survives. And if you think of giving up, that's not you, right? So it's always important to make sure that whatever you are thinking about is for the progress of the tech that you have built, making sure that you're doing right by your investors, your shareholders. So giving up has not been an option. Thankfully, like, it's not that you force yourself not to give up. So resilience, it becomes important. So yeah, I think my parents have been extremely supportive of all my dreams. Like even when I wanted to come to New Zealand for my PhD, there was not a single serious conversation that we had. Oh my God, my daughter is going away, to a foreign country to study. They were like, yeah, you got a scholarship, you got a full scholarship, you're going to get a stipend, you're going to survive. And I left my family when I was in graduation because, I was away from my family for my college. So having that support, it just makes you much more stronger to face whatever challenges life has planned for you, which never stops. It's like, what? One job to the other. But I think I'll always be grateful to my family for bringing me up in a way that is still not ready to give up.
Absolutely. And it's so much of that journey is shaped at those very young ages, isn't it? And we become a part of that as we age as well. We just go back to it, isn't it? Before we finish, I want to ask you the final question. If you had one wish for the world and one message that you can tell them, what would it be and why?
I will be, oh my God, very honest with you, Azura. I do not want to sound like I am in a Miss World pageant or whatever, but looking at where the world is at today, I really wish that people became more pragmatic. Peace, world peace. Because anytime you open up a news app, it's stressing all of us out. Forget Tasmanian, forget the battery industry. I think all of us are wishing that the world goes back to where it was maybe a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, or maybe a year ago, if I'm being very honest. Um, so I really wish that if that happens, we get to calm ourselves down, and then we can worry about, oh, I have a company to take care of. Because right now, I cannot think of expanding, for example, this is very selfish, but I cannot think of expanding my business to the US for reasons known to everyone, right? Anyway, so all I wish for is people to be looking and just thinking about world peace.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shalini. And before we close, where can people find you?
LinkedIn, obviously, because I am super active on LinkedIn. And like if you have any questions for me, if you are a budding entrepreneur, just let me know, because I know you will have many, 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 many questions. Do not think of any question as stupid. I never, ever thought like that. So I have voiced all my questions. You can do the same. So reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have anything, and or if you're looking for a chat in Wellington or a coffee, I'm always here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for jumping on today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and got as much out of it as I did. As always, if this episode speaks to you, please like, share, and subscribe to Care Beyond Profits. I appreciate you, and until next time, keep caring beyond profits.